Preparing, okay. Setting up meeting, YouTube.
ॐ श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादं शङ्करं लोकशङ्करं शङ्करं शङ्कराचार्यं केशवं बादरायणं सूत्रभाष्यकृतौ वन्दे भगवन्तौ पुनः पुनः ईश्वरो गुरुरात्मेति मूर्तिभेदविभागिने व्योमवद्व्याप्तदेहाय दक्षिणामूर्तये नमः। गुकारस्त्वन्धकारो वै ऋकारस्तन्निवर्तकः अन्धकारनिरोधित्वात् गुरुरित्यभिधीयते। ॐ सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः। The summer retreat begins today, Vedanta retreat, and we are going to be studying a chapter from Panchadashi starting today, and then a text called Hasta Malakiya, Hastamalakiyam, or Hastamalakastava, or Hastamalaka Stotram. Anyway, it's got many names, same text. The beauty of having a retreat for a length of time, let's say 10 days, 1 week, is something apart, because what it does is it gives a much needed opportunity for immersion into Vedanta. The periods of immersion are very, very beautiful, because in this immersion there is a respite from what we call business as usual, the daily quote unquote grind, getting up impatiently, not taking the time to check in with oneself, not having the leisure to stop and observe the beauty of the Jagat, which is actually the beauty of oneself, which is the beauty of Bhagavan, and not having the opportunity to be centered. There is a kind of a decentering process that happens as soon as you wake up. It's like the complaints also stretch themselves. They too yawn, they too grumble along with you, and they include physical pain complaints, etc., physical complaints, emotional complaints, too much to do, not enough time, not enough leisure. This is what it is. And in a way, the pandemic has made it worse, because everyone is quote unquote has been up till now working from home. This is both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because you don't have to commute. You save on gas. More than gas, you save on stress of the commute. But on the flip side, you don't know when to stop. You're always working. And so taking the time to give yourself 10 days to study a portion of a book, like a very worthwhile book like the Panchadashi, or study a stotra like the Hastamalakiya. Immerse into the knowledge of Brahman, of the self. It is, it is a great blessing to have this opportunity, because these periods of immersion are needed to interrupt the litany of complaints and the decentering that happens. What do I mean by decentering? Where, as a Vedantin, one is aware of a yawning gap between what one knows and how one behaves in the everyday life. That is the decentering. I know I am Brahman, but dot dot dot, I am not behaving like Brahman at all. I am in fact getting angry, annoyed, reactive, and uh, you know, not disconnected, dissociated. This often seems to be this gap. If one were not studying Vedanta, this gap is understandable to a certain extent, even perhaps excusable, because we think, oh, this is human nature, one is fallible, these things happen. It's okay if you get angry. Naturally, this is an anger invoking situation. How can you not get angry? And these are the things we tell ourselves. But once one starts studying Vedanta, then, then this one is aware of this gap, of the gap between all the studies that have gone in and assimilated. And there is a growing level of clarity, there is a growing and an accompanying sense of peace. Yet at the same time, the unconscious mind is tapping its foot, annoyed, impatiently. Resistances show their faces, especially when they are not wanted. Fears come unbidden, as do the tears. And in this way, these repeated periods of immersion, even if it's a text you have already studied, they are a wonderful respite from samsara. Like I say many times, there is a what is it called? There is a hot oil of samsara, and one is frying like a donut. Or if you want the Indian version of a donut, it is what we call gulab jamun. So frying in the hot oil of samsara, along comes a retreat in the form of the sugar syrup and of knowledge. And then what happens? And this donut is lifted by the slotted angle spoon of the Shruti Mahavakyas, and then dipped into the sweet syrup, where it stays, where it stays for a length of time, in order to absorb the sweetness of the Shastra. The teaching, the sweetness of the teaching actually belongs to you. There is no sweetness of the teaching other than being you. It's your own sweetness that is taught to you. This is exactly how it is. The Shruti gives back, or tells you in an assimilable way, the message of this sweetness. And this sweetness is something which has an abiding presence in the Upanishads itself. There is a whole section in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad called Madhu Vidya, honey knowledge. And it is just primarily named as this in order to underscore that the knowledge of the self is really, really sweet because you are sweet. Because if you were unsweet, how can self knowledge be sweet? This is a logical, this is very logical. If you were bitter, if you were sour, if you were pungent, and then how can self-knowledge, if it's the knowledge of the self, then how can self-knowledge be sweet? Not possible. So self-knowledge is sweet because the nature of the self, namely you, namely Atma, is sweet. But then, why should the donut of the jiva be lifted from the hot oil and put into the sugar syrup of the Shastra? Because you have to, the last syllable of the word donut has to be underscored because the jiva is nuts. That's why. Jiva is a big nut. And why? Because one is unaware of one's sweetness. One is unaware, not understanding one's sweetness. Why? Because one takes the apparent reality to be the final say of the truth of oneself. The apparent reality is finite. Body, anything I encounter, finite. Body, finite. Mind, finite. Senses, finite. Loved ones, finite. Their bodies, finite. Their minds, finite. All objects in the universe, finite. And then so, the conclusion is, I am subject to mortality, to death. I am subject to death. This is the conclusion. Because of this overlay of the wrong conclusion on the subject, namely the self, the I, the Shruti, the Upanishads, the texts that unfold self-knowledge repeatedly describe the self as sweet. And so, this sweetness is something that appears to be elusive because of the effects of Atma Avidya. Atma Avidya means self-ignorance. And therefore, the retreats like this give an opportunity to break from that wrong understanding of the I that is constantly being fed to one and internalized by one, by the society, by the community, even by oneself, repeatedly. And so, we are going to study, these two texts. And the evening class is going to be what is called Hastamalakiyam, a text, a short text written by one of the direct disciples of Adi Shankara, Hastamalaka. And he was named such because, he got the knowledge, it is said, very effortlessly. Amalaka means a gooseberry. A gooseberry, hasta, hand. And it's very, the gooseberry bush is not very tall, and it's easy to pluck the fruit, gooseberry, from the bush. And so with the ease with which one plucks the gooseberry off the bush, this lad had the understanding of the I even before he met his guru. And when he met, he did not bother to talk. He was 12 years old. And he said, what is the point of talking? There is nothing to say, nothing much to say. And everybody is either talking about the same thing all the time, or they are keeping on fighting about something or the other, disagreeing, being disagreeable, or they are complaining. There is nothing much to talk. So the child never talked. And then the child was useless for the what is called, quote unquote, everyday life, normal life, and he would not play with other kids. He would just be there. And then, there is a place for such people. Any passing guru, you hand over this kind of a child, because maybe he will be of use to you, because he is certainly not of use to society. And Adi Shankara just asks him one question. Kahatvam, O child, who are you? Who are you, O child? And and the child responds in these 12, 13 verses called Hasta Malaka. He says, and basically the refrain of the and he just bursts into not just speech but verse, perfect Sanskrit verses. After prostrating in front of the guru, he just bursts into verse, and the refrain is saha nitya upalabdhi swarupaha atma aham. I am that which is ever present Atma, the ever present self, that which is immediately available to experience. When? All the time. That is who I am. And then he gives a big lecture even to the guru, like, I am not this body, I am not this mind, and and the vision has to undergo a big change to understand this. He knows the methodology, he knows everything. And it is in fact a wonderful text worth studying, very, very very, very beautiful. So that is about the evening class. Then in the mornings we will be, and in the night, same time, 8 to 9:15 Eastern time, we will be studying a chapter of a highly regarded text called Panchadashi, composed by one Shankaracharya, not Adi Shankara of course, but one of the descendants of the lineage, called Swami Vidyaranya Swamiji, who was briefly, for about 6 years or so, the Acharya of the Sringeri Mutt. When Adi Shankara was there, he established 4 centers of learning, so that there could be places, seats of dissemination of Vedanta for people who were in search of this knowledge. And so he did these 4 centers of learning, and one of them, a very important Pitha, is called Sringeri Mutt. And this it is in Karnataka, South India. And this Swami Vidyaranya and his very erudite brother, both of them were just amazing, and both of them were acharyas of the Sringeri Mutt. And his life is something which is very unique. He is highly regarded as a saint and a scholar. And you see, everybody in the lineage teaches the same thing, teaches the same exact thing. It's not that this knowledge is new. In fact, it is as ancient as the hills. It is not new at all. There is nothing new. It's all a restatement. Everything is a restatement. And so what makes this knowledge alive, and what makes this ever fresh, and what makes this something that one can relate to no matter which era one lives in, is the presence of these diamonds in the lineage. So the lineage will be made up of Shrotriyas, people who have gained the knowledge soundly from their teacher after immersing in the knowledge for some time, for studying in a committed way for a length of time, and then they they teach, and then their students teach, and the parampara is keeping on going and maintained, of course, at a very at the same frequency, if you want to call it that, same message handed down, keeping on handing down, and suddenly we have a comet called Adi Shankara. In the short space of 32 years, everything has been composed, everything, all the commentaries have been written out of compassion, and then completely it revitalizes the tradition, gives it a shot in the arm, so to speak, gives the tradition a much needed shot in the arm whenever it was either waning, or there was not many people who were there to take it, or there were other adharmic tendencies on the rise, and then suddenly Adi Shankara gave it a shot in the arm. Thank God he wrote, so he was a prolific writer and composer. Because of that, we have a link to how to interpret the Upanishads, how to read the Shastra. We have a direct link. And then again, then the tradition keeps on going. It is maintained. It is, each teacher is a well-oiled wheel that keeps the train going from generation to generation. And then suddenly another scholar, another saint comes up and then gives the tradition a makeover, so to speak. Same knowledge, but some people are blessed with that ability to communicate, and they have that ability to just reach the people. They have the ability to just go beyond certain barriers. Same thing, some new examples or old examples put in new verse, and then again the tradition takes off, and it gets a boost. It just completely thrives and flowers. And so like that, we have many examples of these diamonds who nurture the tradition, and the tradition just blossoms as a result of being watered by the compassion, the compassionate kataksha, the compassionate looks of these saints, who write not for themselves, really. They may be writing a little bit for their own nishtha or clarity, but mostly they write so that other people who struggle to gain this understanding, their pathway is eased. And like another text in the Shastra, what is that called? Viveka Chudamani. Viveka Chudamani, there is a wonderful verse describing such people. And it says that they are Shanta, they are peaceful, they are disciplined Danta, and they live not harming anyone. Nivasanti Santaha, these people, these saints live. And then what do? Vasantavat Lokahitam Charantaha. For no reason, ahetuna, without any reason, without any conditions, without any desire to get a gain for themselves. They, like the spring season, they paint the tradition with colors, a riot of colors, and infuse the tradition with a fragrance that draws people from far and wide. The spring season does not come and say, okay, I'm going to give you this many azaleas this season free, and then this many are going to be charged. This now I need in return XYZ. No. The spring just, that's why it's called spring, because it springs. Just like compassion springs from the wellspring of the nature of the self. This compassion just springs up. This is what it is. So compassion is like spring, and the season is also called spring because both spring without any conditions attached. There is a spontaneity. So, and then here in the Viveka Chudamani couplet, Vasantavat lokahitam charantah, there is a the comparison to the of these kinds of sadhus who infuse the tradition with a new rasayana. Rasayana means like an elixir. They are, they are compared to spring because what precedes spring? Winter. Cold, not much sunlight, dark. And what is that? If the Guru is spring, then what is the winter? Atma Ajnanam, self-ignorance is the winter. And these kinds of gurus are the spring in the lives, in the wintry lives of those with Atma Ajnanam. That is the reason. Vasantavat lokahitam charantah. Lokahitam means they just work for the comfort of the world. The people in the world are not in a comfortable place. Whether you look at it from the standpoint of the pandemic, whether you look at it from the standpoint of so many things. And they're not in a comfortable place. Something or the other is always happening. And so therefore, some difficulties are there, adversities are there, calamities are there. Inimical situations one has to face constantly. And so what is hitam? How do you provide comfort? And you can say a few nice words. If you are able to, you can give people some money, or you can help them to get money, get a job, whatever it is. But these comforts are time bound. They're all time bound. Because if you feed somebody that is hungry, then what will happen? After 2 hours, back to the same state. After 2 hours. Why 2 hours? Because nowadays we are told to eat small, frequent meals, with emphasis on frequent. So then hunger comes frequently. And even money, how long can it sustain? That also happens. That or the need for that is also frequent. So that's why the teachers are compared to the that which follows winter, which is spring, in the sense of like banishing the winter. Of course, winter will come next year in the example, but we shouldn't carry the example that far. So, banishing of Atma Ajnanam, self-ignorance, through works like the Panchadashi, what they do is that they make one comfortable enough to be uncomfortable in one's daily life, and without giving it even a thought. With a falling apart body, I am comfortable because I am comfortable being who I am. I am not dependent on the body for my welfare. I am not dependent on the mind for my well-being. I am not dependent on somebody's approval of me for my sense of being at home with myself. So this is how the teachers, and especially the teachers that have sprung up like Swami Vidyaranya, who is nurturing, and in fact his name itself is like that. Aranya means forest, a forest of knowledge. So he is nurturing an entire ecosystem, starting with Shama, Dama, Uparati, Titiksha, Shraddha, Samadhanam, all the qualifications needed for this knowledge, all the way to big, standing big and tall like oak trees, majestic. Either oak trees or another one is what, these redwoods that we find in the west coast, and majestic, standing tall. That is, that is what he has done for this knowledge. And so when these kinds of saints come along, they, like spring, they bless the people and open their eyes to the truth of their very being and their very nature, because of their teaching, because of their prolific writings. Tirna Swayam, they have themselves crossed. What have they crossed? The ocean of samsara they have crossed. What does that mean? It simply means they are no longer subject to becoming cross. They are no longer cross. This is how to understand what that means. They have crossed the ocean of samsara, the ocean of becoming something or the other, becoming this, becoming that, wanting this, wanting that, going here, going there, all these things. They have crossed over being a person who thinks that I need something to complete me, being a wanting, lacking, desiring person. This is what they have crossed. And then Tirna Swayam, they have crossed this impossible seeming ocean of entanglement into everything that is other than oneself, in order to buttress oneself. Really, that is the entanglement. That is what samsara is. Samsara is catching hold of something in order to feel okay, and then soon realizing that whatever that one has caught hold of is itself not okay. And then that what one has caught hold of is catching on to something else, is catching on to something else, is catching on to something else. And you see how very quickly samsara becomes very catching, because, pun intended, because everybody, is doing this, so one feels one has to do this too. Everyone is catching hold of something else. Pujya Swamiji used to tell this this wonderful story. In fact, it was a true story. And what was the story? There was a flash flood, okay? And this man didn't know how to swim. Most Indians don't know how to swim, even though the 3 parts of India are surrounded by water. We have hydrophobia, okay? We never learn how to swim. We don't know, we don't care, and most people don't know how to swim, And so this man was no exception. He was thrashing in the water because there was a flash flood. He lived on a river bank. He was swept away. And he said, Krishna, he prayed. What else to do? If you can't swim, you at least should know. If you don't know how to swim, you should know at least how to pray. So then he prayed, Krishna, send me something to hold on to. And one log came from upstream. Slowly, one black colored log. And he said, oh, the Lord is so kind. And as it came, he caught hold of it, because it looked like a log. But it was a baby bear. And he was surprised because it caught hold of him tightly too. Because he was not the only one catching hold of it. And you know why this happened? The bear also prayed. This situation is unbearable. Oh Lord, send me something that I can catch hold of. And then this is what happens. This is what exactly samsara is. You catch hold of something, and then you quickly understand that what you caught hold of is more of a liability than a comfort. So, what samsara is like that, it is just so much entanglement. So, tirna swayam, there is only one way to cross it, and to cross it one needs Vedanta. One needs a serious immersion into Vedanta, which is a serious rediscovery of the self as one that is not wanting at all. This is just something beautiful. And so, saints and scholars who contribute to this tradition, like Swami Vidyaranya does, this is what it is. They, Tirna Swayam, they themselves have crossed, and then they are eager to help other people to cross. And mind you, this is not a exercise in proselytization. An exercise in proselytization, it is not. This is not like, oh, I'm going to convert you to Vedanta. There is nothing to convert. Vedanta is about you. It is a universal knowledge for everyone who is sick of what we described as samsara, who is sick of catching hold of something and only to see that it is falling apart. It is for everybody who is sick of this. No matter where one is born, no matter where one is, this is not about some religion or some doctrine or some set of beliefs. This is about you. It is about discovering your nature and inhabiting who you are. This is what it's about. And so, therefore, it is not some kind of a what is that called? Jehovah's Witness exercise, where they just give you flyers and you have to believe that you are saved. It is not about that. This is something about understanding of who you are, rediscovering the truth of oneself, to see that I am not the complaining, demanding person that I thought I was. That is not my truth. I am not the wanting person that I assumed myself to be. I am not the insecure person that I feared I was. That is what it is. And this is what one wants to be. One wants to be non-demanding, non-complaining, appreciative, non-fearful, not sorrowful. This is what is in keeping with the universal wants. If you are a human being, you want all this. Definitely, you ask anybody in any language, in any country, do you want to be happy? Do you want to be peaceful? Do you want to not be bothered by what other people think of you? Do you want to be without limits? The answer will be universally yes, in whatever languages they speak. And so, this writing and this iteration of the knowledge by the shining diadems of scholar saints in the tradition is just from the wellspring of compassion to share the manner in which they have crossed over from this fearful, tearful samsara, to show others also how to cross. Tirna Swayam Bhima Bhavarnamam. Bhima Bhavarnavam means the scary ocean of samsara. They have crossed with the riptides of doubt and the seaweeds of entanglement, and with the, what should I say, the whirlpools of despair and the waves of wants. They have managed to free themselves. Anyanapi ahetuna tarayantaha. Ahetuna means without expecting some fees, without even expecting to have a quote-unquote huge following, without expecting to get anything. They simply do this for the sake of just helping others without any want, any conditions, anything at all. This is why the tradition has not only survived, but it has thrived because of such people. I mean, every guru, every person who teaches is like that. But these kinds of verses were made for someone like Swami Vidyaranya. He was, he was a young boy and very influenced by his younger brother, the story goes. And then the younger brother, who was few years younger than he was, ran away from home and went to the Sringeri Matha, and whoever was the reigning Acharya, and then asked to be initiated. And seeing his lustrous face, the pontiff said yes immediately, even though he was not given to that. He had not, he had not initiated anybody because he didn't think they deserved it. But then seeing this young boy, he immediately said yes. And then after a while, the elder brother also followed. And both brothers were very, very important additions to the history of the Sringeri Mutt. Both of them were reigning pontiffs, and then prolific writers and everything, and great Vedantins. But with Swami Vidyaranya, he has also been credited with the one who established or helped establish the Vijayanagar Empire in South India in the 1360s or something. Again, there were two brothers, Harihara and Bukka. They were two brothers, and those two brothers were kings who were conquering a few places, but they wanted to reign from a place of compassion and clarity. So they studied with Swami Vidyaranya. They became Vedantins, and then they became kings, really. Or they were side by side kings and Vedantins. And in the ancient time, this is how it would be. Every Raja, every king had a guru, including Lord Rama had a guru. Lord Krishna also had a guru, Sandipani. And then some of the gurus of kings were known as Raja Gurus or Raja Rishis, Rajarshis. And then they would advise the king on what kind of decisions to take to make the kingdom very compassionate, and so that it would be a kingdom that would work for the well-being of the people rather than for the king and his coterie of small group of people. And so it was a truly selfless service being a king, especially if the king was a Vedantin. And then we have examples of that even in the Upanishads, where there is one king, Janaka, not to be confused with the one in the Ramayana. And then there is, and then there is one more king, Janashruti, who all go for this self-knowledge. King Janaka was a highly regarded Vedantin. And then again in the Ramayana we have Raghu, who knew self-knowledge. And then we have Lord Rama, of course, and like this we have a tradition of kings who are enlightened to the truth of their own nature and who serve. And then the gurus, the Raja Gurus, actually, what should I say? They are the ones sitting on the throne, and the kings are just ruling the kingdom by proxy. And this is how it was. There is a painting of this Swami Vidyaranya sitting on the throne, and Harihara and Bukka, the kings, sitting at the floor at his feet. And so this is somebody's imagination based on this history. And so this is something, so this shows us something about Swami Vidyaranya, that how his understanding of Vedanta was so prolific that it could be applied to any situation. And he did not think it was outside of the scope of being a sadhu to be able to advise people on how to establish a compassionate kingdom. This was something which is very, very nice. He did not think of that at all. And he was so compassionate, the stories go, that whenever anybody asked him of anything, he would just go ahead and do that. Up till Swami Vidyaranya's reign in the Sringeri Mutt, and even though he ruled only in the Sringeri Mutt, he was the pontiff for only about 6 or 7 years. In that time, so many changes were brought about, because until he came as the ruler of the Sringeri Mutt, as the head of the Sringeri Mutt, the people were all just into teaching and study of Vedanta. So the mutts had a reputation of catering to just a small group of people who are interested in self-knowledge. Who is interested in self-knowledge? Tell me. The answer is no one. Really, who is interested? Well, who will come? Who wants to keep on listening to A for Atma, B for Brahman, C for Chit, D for Dharma? Who wants to keep on listening to this? Not many people, really. And so, because the pull of the Jagat is quite, the pull of everything that you have caught hold of is pulling you further and further away from the knowledge of yourself. And that's what I talked about earlier as disconnection and decentering. And so there's not many takers, because it requires a lot of emotional maturity. It requires the ability to sit and listen. It requires the ability to be somewhat comfortable with oneself. It requires the ability to have let go of so many kinds of easily available source of entertainment, and to find oneself the most entertaining. One has to grow to that level, and so not many takers. And so the mutts had this, the Sringeri Mutt and all these mutts had the reputation of catering to just a few elite scholars and people who were interested in the Shastra, not anyone else. But then Swami Vidyaranya came over as the pontiff and gave it a complete makeover to make it more relatable to the people in terms of pujas, in terms of forms of worship, teaching people not just, you are the whole, but how to get to the place of understanding this knowledge. Talking about karma yoga, talking about preparation, talking about dharma. And you see now all the mutts, whether it is Sringeri Mutt or any other mutt, they are very much, there's not much of a difference between the townspeople and they are or the Vedantins. Everybody goes. They are popular, the mutts are popular places of refuge for anybody who is struggling in any way. And and even now the acharyas talk in a very easy to understand way, and they are themselves very erudite. But the greatest sign of erudition is to be able to speak in a manner that is relatable. Then only your knowledge is worth something. If you talk on some other level, it's like a plane going overhead. It is a big presence and it is noisy, but nothing goes in. What use is that? And so in those 6 years, he brought about so many changes, and he was a very prolific writer as well. And we have many, he wrote a biography of Adi Shankara, Shankara Vijaya, Madhaviya Shankara Vijaya, very nice. And then he also wrote the Jivan Mukti Viveka. What is describing the person who has gained this understanding and who has come out of the ocean of samsara. What does that look like even while alive? Very forward thinking, very forward thoughts in this must read book, Jivan Mukti Viveka, wonderful book. And and what do I mean by very forward thinking? Right on the first page itself, he says there is no reason why women cannot renounce this world and take to a life of being a mendicant or a renunciant. There is no reason why women are not entitled to Jivan Mukti. Very beautiful. Right at the beginning he says this. And he feels the need to say this because in his time this was certainly not the prevalent view. In fact, even now it is not the prevalent, more or less the prevalent view. Even now there is a feeling that if you have to be a man in order to be a Swami. That's just because of some ignorance, that's all. I was coming from India once to the United States. I was traveling, and then I had a seat mate who asked me, an Indian man, why are you all dressed in orange? I said, because I am a Swami. No, 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 no. He got very upset. No, you cannot be a Swami. I said, why not? Because women can't be Swamis. And so, and I just smiled and I said, that is a common perception, but it is true that but it is not necessarily true. There are many orders where women are initiated, and so I told him that. He still had a long time. He took a long time to come to terms with it. He was very disturbed. And then, so like this, even now, it is something which is not very well understood. So you can imagine in 1375 he is writing this book, and he is dispelling the myth, the gender myth and all these things he was dispelling in this book. Wonderful book of what a jnani's life is like, and what is a jnani. And then he also, of course, he wrote also another small set of verses called Drigdrishya Viveka. I think he likes the word Viveka because there is Jivan Mukti Viveka, Drigdrishya Viveka, and then the first chapters of the Panchadashi are also all have Viveka, Tattva Viveka, and then this, what is that, so many, 5 elements Viveka, like this. The first 5 chapters also have Viveka in the title. So, so he wrote Drigdrishya Viveka, the seer-seen discrimination, a very highly regarded and a lucid text, and a very beautiful, profound text. And Drigdrishya Viveka, and starts with a very clear postulate that whatever you see is not you. And from there he builds it, beautiful, and takes it all the way. And then, of course, the current text at hand, what is the name of this? Panchadashi. He is also the author of Panchadashi. Panchadashi means she who has 15 chapters. Feminine, and even though people think women can't be Swamis, the knowledge is always feminine. Okay. Brahma Vidya, feminine. Shruti, feminine. Saraswati, the bearer of knowledge, feminine. And then what else? Upanishad, the word Upanishad, feminine. Knowledge is always feminine. Because she, because it's like because it has certain things associated with that which we call the best of that which is feminine. Compassion, clarity, courage, etc. And then so all this is there, and then in this text called Panchadashi, it is, you can say, a magnum opus. Huge work, very fat. If you want to look at the book, I have it here. You see how fat it is? Yeah. This is the book. And so this so it's a magnum opus in which the 15 chapters, each chapter has the distinction of being a stand-alone piece of writing, so that you can get away with studying one chapter, and at the same time it connects very beautifully to all the other chapters. Just so amazing, fantastic. I mean, who can write like that? Usually when somebody writes, it will be like, okay, chapter 1 is connected to chapter 2, And then if you read chapter 3 without reading chapter 1 or 2, it is of no use, because you won't understand the context, you won't understand what is happening. Panchadashi is not like that. Each chapter it can be studied as a standalone piece, a very fine piece of Vedantic writing. And at the same time, when you are able to appreciate, when you give yourself the time to appreciate the entire text, the text in its entirety, you see how beautifully it is connected. Very versatile writer. So he has two, Swami Vidyaranya's writing style has two knacks that are great contributions for our clear understanding. What is the first one? The first one is the ability, is a kind of an elasticity. He will take one Upanishadic sentence or two and use it at the beginning of the chapter as a Mahapratignya. Mahapratignya means a very important thesis statement that is going to be being stated, and that's going to be unfolded in the rest of the verses of the chapter. This is what is Mahapratignya. Okay, so he uses one or two statements from the Upanishad, and he can go on and on and on, composing verses about it. Who can do that really? Composing verses about it and expanding the understanding until he is satisfied that he has said everything that he wants to say. Chapter 7, Tripti Deepa, in the Panchadashi, is a case in point. There is a Brihadaranyaka Vakya, a sentence from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad that says, Atmanam ched vijaniyat soyam asti iti purushah kimartham kasya kamaya shariram anusanjvaret. If one knows without a shadow of doubt or vagueness that I am the truth of the self, I am everything, I am the whole, I am limitless, I am free of sorrow, then for what purpose, kasyaka, and desiring what, will the person move in spheres of activity? Will person put the body, mind, sense complex through all these motions of trying to get something or trying to get rid of something? This is one statement in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. And this statement in Tripti Deepa, in the lamp of satisfaction centered on the self, he illumines this one sentence with I think something like 296 verses. I think it is the longest chapter, coming right in the middle of the Panchadashi. So he has this wonderful knack. Amazing. One statement he can take and then stretch it and stretch it and stretch it. And then the other way that he endears himself, Swami Vidyaranya's writings endear themselves to us, is because they aid the clarity by dispensing with what we call our distractions, doubts, etc., that are not needed at all. See, Vedanta is not something that is a monologue. It is really a dialogue. And what kind of a dialogue? It's a sacred dialogue called Samvada, where the student asks questions of the teacher that are pertinent and that are not just there to take down the teacher's words or argumentative. Rather, the questions asked are for the sake of enhancing the clarity and removing doubts. So then, that's why every Upanishad is in form of a dialogue. You have a teacher, you have a student, you have some story around them, and then the teaching proceeds. And here also, and then in the course of this dialogue, what happens is that, when the commentators comment upon the Upanishad, then they also have to deal with the sparring partners, the contemporary sparring partners, which are called Purva Pakshis, Purva Pakshin. Purva Pakshis means those people who belong to viewpoints, who have points of view that are different from what Vedanta has to say. And this can get very confusing because they can sound like the Vedantin, but they are espousing something completely different. I heard, and this I hear a lot in the some interfaith meetings I go to, and one of the speeches I heard some person say, I forgot which religion that person was representing, and he said, you know, we are all whole. And I sat up, I said, oh, this is nice to hear from somebody from another religion to say that we are all whole. This is very nice. So I listened closely, and then I was disappointed immediately. We are all whole. He started off with a bang, and then the next sentence was a whimper, because he said, yet we are all broken. And I said, what? Yes, we are all whole, and at the same time we are broken. We are broken and we are whole. I mean, even logically, how is this possible? So you see, there is like what is it called? Vedanta Abhasa. Abhasa means it sounds like Vedanta. You know, it feels like Vedanta, but it ain't Vedanta. So there are a lot of what should I say, sneaky points of view that if one's understanding is not drida, firm, one can get swept away. One can totally get swept away. This happens a lot. One can get distracted. All that is needed is some bad, some papa attack, some bad karma attack, and then one can get swept away to some other things. And so the commentators on the Upanishads, like Adi Shankara and other Tikakaras, etc., what they did in the commentary is they set up these partners, these different people with different viewpoints as sparring partners, and had a imaginary dialogue with them. Not a sacred dialogue. This is just to show them the error of their ways. And this really contributes to our understanding, because very soon one understands that these sparring partners with whom, whether it is Adi Shankara or Swami Vidyaranya are debating, are actually in my head and I didn't even know it. These objections I am the one who is raising. They were buried deep into the unconscious, and then they are all now resuscitated and brought out and boxed out of the Upanishad, out of our understanding rather of the Upanishad. Very, very important. And then in Vidyaranya's time, as in Adi Shankara's time, there were some of these fellows, like Nayayikas, logicians, Vaisheshikas, confused logicians. How else to translate Vaisheshikas? Confused logicians. Charvakas, what are they called? Materialists. What you see is what is there. What you don't see is what is not there. This is how it was. No afterlife, no accountability, no responsibility, no dharma, nothing. And live here, eat, drink, be merry. Even if you go into debt, make sure that you have ghee with every meal. This is their philosophy. And so like this there were all these, and then Sankhya, and then some other like this Buddhists and Jains and Ekadeshi. Ekadeshi means one track mind this person would have. And so like these are the sparring partners. And even though this is a work in verse form, the sparring partners are very much there. They also talk in verse, and they also say, but your Vedanta is not okay, because your Vedanta is saying this, but actually it's not this. And it is just with a lot of humor, a lot of compassion, he dispenses with all of them. In chapter 10, he says, you know what, I'm sick of driving you away. Now for a change, I'm going to say, come study Vedanta under a guru. Go find a guru, study Vedanta, and all your doubts will be removed, he says. And so like this, these are some of the very wonderful very, very wonderful traits and contributions of Swami Vidyaranya's writing, and we will have a chance to understand this and see more of this, starting tomorrow when we actually enter the text. And then no, not tomorrow, this evening, tonight we will have a chance when we enter the text. So when we enter the text, we will see that the 15th chapter, I'll say a few more things about the 15th chapter, and then and then save some time for questions and some interactions, so that will be nice. And so in the 15th chapter, is the closing chapter, obviously, of the Panchadashi, and the 15th chapter has got a very interesting title. Vishayanande Brahmananda. So it is called Vishayananda. Vishayananda means the joy, Ananda, joy, derived from interacting with objects. Objects of delight, obviously. And then on this intriguing note, the Panchadashi closes. Very, very beautiful. And why does the Panchadashi close on this intriguing note? Because this is where the gap is. The gap between one's knowledge and one's behavior in the everyday life is exactly because one doesn't understand the basic concept of where this thing called happiness comes from. If it is self-generated, if this happiness is self-generated, then how come it is not there all the time? And if it is based on objects, then again the same question arises, how come it is not there all the time? And so therefore, this desire to be happy, the desire to have unbridled, uninhibited, uninterrupted happiness is, as I said at the beginning of this talk, universal. It is there in all beings, and it is most available in human beings, most discerned, most blossomed, most flowered in human beings. And then what do we see here? We see something which is very, very beautiful, that if this desire to be happy is inbuilt in me, then where is it that I am going wrong? One is going wrong, according to Swami Vidyaranya, in where one is looking for this happiness. In the place where I am looking for this happiness is where happiness is not. Happiness is centered on the self. Yet we find even the most seasoned of Vedantins get into the trap of depending on something other than oneself to be happy. And then if one is a Vedantin, there is guilt and there is fear. Oh no, here I go again. What's wrong with me? I should know better. How come I like ice cream so much? Why do I like cake so much? Why do I like sweet things so much? And the more one, butts heads with the objects of love and the objects that one thinks can make them happy, the more one is fighting with oneself. And that is why the last chapter of the Panchadashi says, whatever it is that you are in love with is yourself alone. So the subject-object difference, I, Atma, object, Anatma, this is Vedanta baby talk. Goo goo ga ga. This is what everyone cuts their teeth on. I am Atma, everything that I can objectify is Anatma. Although this is a good beginning point, it's not a good ending point, precisely because of the fact that this is, it causes duality if you end on this note. Object, subject, object, duality. Then where is Advaita? Gone, gone to the hand basket. Gone. And so, therefore, the uh, a scholar and a saint like Swami Vidyaranya, who lived the knowledge every day, he was able to bridge this gap very nicely, because there is no gap, so to speak. There is no conflict. There is no contradiction. All the objects resolve into the subject. The subject itself is irresolute, does not resolve into anything. This is the premise of the 15th chapter. And if this is not understood, one becomes what is called a Ananda hog, a joy hog. One keeping on looking wherever it doesn't exist. And even after finding it, even after you find something that makes you happy, that happiness is further inhibited by the state of the body and by the state of the mind, and that is all complicates this pursuit of joy, which is really a ghost pursuit, because it's really like trying to catch your own tail. Sometimes the dogs and these cats have these crazies, and they keep going around trying to catch their own tail. So the pursuit of this quote unquote Ananda is trying to catch your own tail. And this Swami Vidyaranya in the coming verses will make very clear, and tomorrow we will do Pravesha, entry into the text. I will say the closing prayer, and then I think if Shuddhatmaji is here, he can say a few words and welcome you all. ॐ पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते ॐ शान्तिः 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 हरिः ॐ श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः हरिः ॐ.
Pranam Swaminiji. Hello.
Namaskar, how are you? I can hear you very well. I had muted myself.
Swamiji, am I audible?
Yes,
Okay.
very clear, very clear. Please continue.
Very clear? Okay,
Yes.
Thank you, ma.
Om, Om.
Om Shri Ganeshaya Namaha. On behalf of everyone at the Gurukulam and all the viewers, we invite Swaminiji for this course of Vedanta on Panchadashi and Hastamalakiyam. Even though there is so much of time difference, Swaminiji is able to accept our invitation and try to conduct these classes from India. Thank you, Swaminiji, for accepting this invitation.
Thank you.
Secondly, we welcome all of you to attend on Panchadashi and Hastamalakiyam or Hastamalaka Stotram. So both the texts are very interesting, and of course Swaminiji will always make it more interesting with her clarity and a touch of humor. Apart from Swaminiji's classes, this has been already mentioned in the schedule, but I will read it for you for one more time so that it can stay with you. So we also offer or do live streaming of morning puja at 5:45 a.m. the duration of 1 hour, and the evening at 5:30 p.m. the duration of half an hour. So if you get some time, please to attend these pujas in the morning and evening. And this is the schedule that has been given to you all. The day begins with morning meditation at 7 o'clock. Swaminiji will be conducting. And after that, Panchadashi class 1 will be at 8 o'clock. till 9:15 a.m. And in the evening, Hasta Malikiya class from 5 to 6:15 p.m. and Panchadashi class 2 in the evening at 8 to 9:15 p.m. So these are all Eastern time. All the details have been given by our Sahadevji and Chitraji, and everything has been posted on the website. You will not miss out anything. So please contact our Sahadev or Chitra if you have any technical difficulty in logging in. So Sahadev's email is sahadev, SAHADEV 108 at me.com or rajan.chitra at gmail.com. So these are the few things I wanted to share with you, and let us be all prayerful to keep everyone in India safe and healthy. So I'll be seeing you again and again, but today is the introduction day. I thought that I welcome Swamini and all the viewers. Thank you and enjoy the
please
rest of
come
the
every day.
week.
You're most welcome anytime.
I will try my best,
Yeah,
Swaminiji.
anytime,
But,
anytime.
Thank you all, and I'm sure you will have a what you call treat to your ears for 1 week. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much
Welcome.
for
Namaste.
namaskar, namaskar. One more small announcement. In 10 minutes, we have a Chandogya Bhashya 6th chapter that is going on, and if anybody would like to check it out or have more immersion, that is also on Zoom, but not this Zoom room, another Zoom room. I have just posted the website there. If you go on the website, you can click there and you are welcome to come. It's in the next 10 minutes. It will be at 9:15. So only on weekends it is there. You can join if anybody wants to do that. All right. All the best.
Thank you so much. You can send me those details. I usually send email every Friday.
Okay. I will send you the
It is good to include these classes also. Those who are interested, they can all join.
Sure. Thank you, Siddhartmaji.
Okay,
Take care.
namaskaram.
Om.
Have a wonderful day, all of you.
Yeah, all of you.
Namaste.
Take care. Om.
Om.
See you later. Om.